Hi there, Jeremiah Peck here, and welcome to this video in a series on preparing for the National Counselor Examination, or NCE. This video is part one on the two-part series on human growth and development, which is one of the 8 core areas that is tested in the National Counselor Examination. In this video specifically, we're going to be looking at 5 major theorists that have to do with human growth and development. We're looking at their specific theories as well as practicing some ways to remember these names as well as the names associated with their theories as well. The first topic we're going to look at is behaviorism. Then we're going to look at Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. We're going to look at Kohlberg's stages of moral development. We're going to look at Piaget's stages of cognitive development. And lastly, we're going to briefly look at Vygotsky's different take on cognitive development as well. Now, this first area that we're going to look at is behaviorism. And this is the view of development as influenced by social contexts, as influenced by modeling. Here you have concepts related to conditioning. One of the theorists that are associated with behaviorism that's really helpful for us to know is Ivan Pavlov, as made famous by the classic example of Pavlov's dog. Now, some of the words that are going to be really helpful for you to remember with regards to behavior is the notion or the concept of conditioning. Now, sometimes, as you'll see quite referenced throughout this video series, is having unique ways of memorizing or remembering these concepts is going to be really helpful. A misconception about memorizing is that you have to memorize something word for word, when in reality you just need to install ideas in your mind which can help you remember or jog your memory regarding some of these names and concepts. So when you think of behaviorism, you can think of BC. Behaviorism has to do a lot with conditioning, and Pavlov, through Pavlov's dog experiment, illustrates the operant conditioning, classic conditioning, and otherwise. Another name that you'll see with regards to behaviorism is John Watson and Joseph Wolpe. One that you may get questions on in the NCE specifically is B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner has a lot of work. You might remember Skinner's work with Bobo the clown doll, where the kids came in after watching a violent video, and they were put into a room with the clown doll, Bobo the clown, and they would beat on the clown, and this other control group of kids that were not shown a violent video were brought into another room, and they were more kind to the dolls. Has to do with social modeling, as with behaviorism. Next, we're looking at Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. Now, this is a lot of information for most people to try to remember because there are 8 stages, but each stage has 2 options that you could go through. So there's really 16 things to remember here. So Erikson and his 8 stages of psychosocial development. The first is trust versus mistrust. And easy way to remember this is every relationship begins with what? Trust. So first stage of Erikson's development is trust versus mistrust. The next one, if you think of you're in school, often there's a teacher and then there's a TA. Well, T was the trust, that's the first stage. Second stage starts with an A, which is autonomy. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. You can start to understand how it's not just you're memorizing 16 different words, because you're going to remember these based on what the next word is. So autonomy, what's the opposite of autonomy? Autonomy is feeling confident in your ability to choose, act, move, and do. The other side of that is doubt and maybe some shame. So it's the second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. First stage, trust versus mistrust. Second stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt, TA. The next 4 stages start with the letter I. So I. A really helpful way to remember these 4 I's is all of the first words on these 4 I's are initiative. So you think you initiate. Industry, the second one. Imagine this life cycle where you initiate and then you get a job. You get a job in an industry. This is a way to remember this. After you get a job in this industry, you begin to think, well, who am I in this industry? And you focus on your identity. And after figuring out who you are, you get into a relationship with other people and you form intimacy. These are the first words in all of the next 4 stages, the 4 I's: initiative, industry, identity, and intimacy. Once you know those 4 words, it's easier to understand what the opposites of those are. There's initiative, taking the lead, or more guilt, more being hesitant to take the lead in those things. Industry, the opposite, and the 4th stage is inferiority. Identity, the 5th stage, the opposite is role confusion. Intimacy, the 6th stage, the opposite is isolation. So far we've covered number 1, trust versus mistrust; 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt; 3, initiative versus guilt; 4, industry versus inferiority; 5, identity versus role confusion; and 6, intimacy versus isolation. Now, if you think to yourself, you're 6 of the stages through here, and there are just 2 more, you're also going to think of the last 2, similar to us saying the first 2 were TA, the last 2 are GI. I've heard everything from GI Joe to gastrointestinal to try to remember this as far as like your GI, but just think GI, generativity and stagnation, and then finally integrity versus despair. And these are Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. From here, we're going to look briefly at Lawrence Kohlberg, and you might see brief reference to Kohlberg's stages of moral development. These are 3 stages, which are pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional. In the pre-conventional stage, someone is really focused on how to avoid consequences, that their whole moral reasoning is just, how do I not get in trouble? Conventional is when they are committed to following the rules. What are the rules that are important for us to follow? And post-conventional is this area of understanding not just the rules, but what it really serves the greater moral good and the greater common law for all members of society, really thinking beyond just letters of the law and more of the heart behind the laws represented in people. It's helpful to note also, by the way, that Lawrence Kohlberg, when he studied moral development, mostly, exclusively actually, studied men. So Carol Gilligan studied moral development for women. So you're going to see the name Carol Gilligan with regards to moral development for women. I'm going to pause here briefly so we can review. With regards to behaviorism, write down John Watson, Ivan Pavlov, Joseph Wolpe, and B.F. Skinner. Then you have Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development, Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development, and Carol Gilligan's moral development for women. Next, we're going to look at Jean Piaget and 4 areas of cognitive development here. One is sensory motor, which is from birth to 2 years old, pre-operational, which is ages 2 to 7, concrete operational, which is 7 to 12, and then formal operations, which is 12 to 16. A way to remember these here, you can try to come up with a fancy acronym. It's SPCF. If you have words that can fit in there, that's one way to remember this. One way that I remember these 4 stages in Piaget's work is to think sensory motor. Before you start something, the first stage for me is to get a sense of it. So I'm sensing what I'm supposed to do. The next thing is pre-operational. So before I operate, I'm going to do some pre-operational things. So pre has this idea of I've gotten a sense of it, stage 1. Stage 2, now I'm getting a preparation or a pre-work involved. The third stage is then laying that foundation. When I think of a foundation, I think of concrete. So you're doing concrete operational. And then when something is matured and fully built, I think we've finally gotten ready at the end. We put on our suit and tie or our fancy dress, and we're ready to go to a formal event in the evening. Well, this is formal operations. So sensory motor, you're getting a sense of the idea. Pre-operational, you're getting prepared. Concrete, you're laying that foundation after the preparation. And when all the work is done, you put on the fancy attire and you're ready for a formal operation. Those are Piaget's 4 stages there. The last thing we're going to look at is Lev Vygotsky. And Vygotsky, as opposed to Piaget, that primarily looked at internal cognitive development, that is chronological stages, that someone would move across based on their chronological age and development. Vygotsky more so emphasized cognitive development with regards to social learning. So a helpful concept to remember with regards to Vygotsky are things like the zone of proximal development, which has to do with the environment in which a child finds themselves, and if that challenge is too stressful, if the child can do it on their own, or if they need help. Concepts related to Vygotsky's work include scaffolding, along with Piaget referenced things like assimilation and accommodation, and Vygotsky would take those concepts and along with the scaffolding, see, can a child do this on their own? Do they have the cognitive resources, or do they need help to do something? Is it within that zone of something they're able to do and not be too overly stressful? So in the next video, we're going to look at other theorists of human growth and development in part 2. Part 1, we've, just by way of review, we've looked at behaviorism, we've looked at psychosocial development, we've looked at moral development, and 2 major theorists with regards to cognitive development. I hope this part 1 of human growth and development has been helpful for you in studying for the National Counselor exam, and I'll see you on the next episode.